Subsequently to that impact, that crash, there was a short pause, and we're talking 8 to 10 seconds max, and then there was an immediate explosion where clearly the fire had breached the actual fuel source, and it was an immediate bomb blast going off.
I'm Sonia Morton-Firth, and you're tuned in to the Sonia Morton-Firth Show. Today my guest is Jamie Hull, former Special Forces reservist. Jamie's life changed forever at the age of 32 when he was nearly burnt alive in a plane crash. Watch this interview as we discuss surviving death, the mental strength and determination to pull through and rebuild a new body and life. I believe health is the greatest form of wealth we have, which is why I'm so excited to be partnered with Brother in Arms. Brother in Arms is a wellness brand dedicated to working with veterans, first responders, and anyone on the front line. Through their education, support, and premium CBD products, they help alleviate and restore the lives of those that have been affected by physical and mental trauma. Learn about the life-changing benefits and power of CBD. Join their community today. Hit the link below. Jamie, thank you so much for being a guest in my home. I'm honoured to have you here. Welcome.
You're absolutely you're more than welcome. Sonia.
Cheers.
Great to be here.
I hope you
Cheers.
enjoy my nice cup of tea that I've made you in my mugs.
Well.
In my mugs. Jamie, look, you've got an absolutely incredible story, and the more I was reading about you, the more I knew that I had to have a chat with you. And we're going to dive into the whole story today. Can I take you back to that day, though, that changed your life?
Sure. So it was the summer of 2007, and I decided to, if you like, not just not just talk the talk, but to actually walk the walk. And so my ambition at that time was to actually learn to fly, and learn to fly specifically a light aircraft, and that's where you start in terms of learning. And in order to do that, I needed a specific time frame to fulfill that, and I had a window of opportunity. So let's just say I had about 6 weeks of downtime in the summer of 2007. So I'd been doing all this work with my regiment, and I'd been going to different hotspots and locations around the world, doing all this kind of operational training, and different environments from jungle to Arctic to mountain to desert, and a wonderful, rich life experience. But then we were due to ramp up and to deploy, and it was an operational deployment later in the autumn of 2007. But I knew that I had a little bit of downtime, and I thought, great, this is my window. This is when I can fulfill the dream of learning to fly. Wow. And that ambition kind of goes way back to when I was a kid. And my late grandfather trained as a pilot in his kind of younger years, and he very much inspired me when I was a kid. Like, for example, remember I told you at the beginning that I very briefly lived in Stopsley in Luton. So my granddad, from a very young age, we're talking 5-6 years of age, used to take me to the boundary fence of Luton Airport, and I'm looking through the binoculars.
You're a plane spotter.
Well, yeah, I was a bit of a plane spotter, thanks to Granddad with the kind of binoculars. Yeah. And I was inspired by the big boys, throttling up the engines, and the noise of the engines testing, and the backwash and the smell of the kerosene.
It's quite interesting because you were because obviously we talked about your underwater adventures being a paddy diver.
Yeah.
And for you also to love the air as well.
I did.
Because I find, when I talk to people, and I know from my own experience, because I've tried my paddy, but I love being up in the air. I love skydiving.
Yeah.
So to love
done both, a bit of skydiving as well.
Yeah, I can see. I can see.
Yeah. Yeah. So I did. So from a very young age, I was inspired by kind of like the aviation industry in that world, and I thought maybe one day I'd like to learn and see how I go. And so that was what that summer was all about, 2007. So I decided to walk the walk. I went to the US Embassy in London because I chose America because of the better weather prospects in Florida, rather than, conversely trying to train here in the UK. The chances are bad weather was going to get me rained off more often than not, and I might not necessarily fulfill the dream within that summer. So Went out to the States, went to Florida, armed with my visa with the passport in the back pocket, and then I'm going to fast forward. So now 1 month into the course, and I was now pilot in command or flying solo in a single engine piston light aircraft in Florida airspace, and on this one particular day, I'd made a flight in the morning. I'd made a quick flight from, let's call it Aerodrome A Alpha to Aerodrome B Bravo. So one small airport to another, made that hop. It was about 10 kilometres distance. And then I'd flown back to Aerodrome A Alpha. But when on a later flight, it was around about lunchtime. So it was about 12:30 hours that I'd gone up in the afternoon after a recent torrential rainfall.
So was there anything that day, Jamie, before you got into the plane, that made you think that there was something going to go wrong, or you didn't have any inclination of that?
No, at that stage of the game, I was pretty confident. I mean, I'd been flying solo for around about 8 days, and it was good. I mean, it was good conditions. You know, I checked from in the local flight centre. I checked the weather. And I'd look at the sort of radar reports and the general sort of meteorological reports. Things were good. There was a recent torrential rainfall that just happened sort of over the lunchtime period, which was good because then the air and the atmosphere typically clears. So it was good weather, you know, bluebird sort of sky, and a few puffy clouds and fairly sort of light winds. It was good conditions really, and I was pretty confident at that stage of the course and the training. So I went up, and I was in the pattern. So I was working within the pattern in the local airspace for that small aerodrome. And then on this one particular afternoon, 19th of August 2007, I remember coming downwind and sort of reporting my position, you know, speaking to the tower below on the radio net and giving them the update for my position, then coming crosswind. And as I came crosswind, I looked out my left-hand canopy window and I saw a thin streak of visible yellow-orange sort of flame. And it was clearly, I almost had to look again because it was definitely flame that I recognised, and it was clearly coming from the front portion of the fuselage, you know, sort of the casing surrounding the engine in front of me, you know, beyond the windshield. And I started to think, oh my God, is that what I think it is? Is that flame? And as I made my final turn, sort of left banking now, 90 degrees left banking into wind now, and I'm setting myself up for a final approach towards the active runway below, so final approach. I make that turn, and the fire immediately breaches the cockpit down below. So my first alert on that was when I looked down at my feet on the rudder pedals, I could see the flame actually breach the cockpit internally.
So your feet were basically on fire?
Yeah, so that's what happened. So where it breached, my feet on those rudder pedals, the flame started to collect around the feet and ankles. I was wearing, I remember, like these suede sort of nubuck hiking shoes and socks, and the flame started creeping around those shoes and socks.
And what was your immediate thoughts? What was going through your mind?
So immediately I'm thinking, my God, I've got to get this aircraft down. And I'm looking forwards at the altimeter on the instrument panel, and the altimeter is spinning down through 1,900, 800 feet, 700 feet. And as I'm descending, I'm consciously aware that the fire is starting to build up within the confines of the cockpit.
Were you feeling the pain at this point?
Not really feeling the pain because there was some slight through draft because of the ventilation within the cockpit. But I won't lie to you that the initial fluster and the sort of onset of panic in my mind was starting to sort of rear up. And I'm thinking, I've got to get this aircraft down, And this is for real. This was no drill. And this was a real life emergency. And indeed, I'd practiced for emergency protocol with the engine during training, a possible emergency landing sort of situation. But this was an absolute real life scenario, and I had to get the aircraft down. There was no margin for error regarding that. You know, I had to get it down onto the ground, full stop. And as I'm descending, like I mentioned, fire is building up, and I'm watching altimeter, so 700, 600, 500 feet. So I'm about half the drop now.
So you couldn't just, sorry, and this is just me perhaps being a little bit ignorant, you couldn't have just bailed and pulled your parachute?
Not at that height.
Not at that height.
And many people have asked me, but we don't, You don't typically wear a parachute in a light aircraft, and there's no kind of advanced system for sort of pull red handle for ejector seat. There is none of that. It's just a basic, very conventional single engine piston light aircraft, just a trainer or a basic commuter, and so I didn't have that option, and I had to get the aircraft down onto the ground. So about 500 feet, I became super aware, if you will, that the fire was now about halfway up within the chamber of the small cockpit. And my alarm bells really started to ring at that stage. And it became a bit of a no-brainer, so to speak, that the chances are that I wasn't going to make it, and that therefore I wasn't going to be able to run in to ground level, land it, and then roll into a full stop halt. The likelihood was that I wasn't going to make it because the chances of the fire completely overwhelming me with that kind of elapsed time, running into a full stop. And so I thought the only way that I've got a chance is to do something a little bit different here, a little bit irrational, if you will, but this was what I was going to do. So about 500 feet approximately, it was like, I call it a light bulb moment, and this was my game plan. I gently veered my stick to the left, just tweaked it maybe sort of 10 degrees or so away to my left, and I veered away from the concrete runway in the distance below towards a grassy stretch. And I was looking for a wide expanse of kind of grass off to my left, gently running in towards that. Now I'm gliding in some 500, 400 feet, 300 feet. And now I start to look just beyond, through the windshield, left and right. I'm looking for hazard, looking for obstacles, looking for anything that's kind of going to be in my path. I'm looking for a clear run in while I'm gliding the aircraft in as gently as I could. And during that process, I also followed the emergency protocol. So I also flicked back to the training that I'd received from the US flight instructors. And I remember one of the flight instructors had always said to me, if there's a problem, if there's an emergency, if you've got a problem, fly the damn aircraft. And of course, that stuck with me. And I thought, this is what I've got to do. I've got to maintain control, fly the aircraft and glide in to the last moment. So I kept running in, looking forward, looking left, looking right. And I'm aware that I'm dropping a lot of height now, trying to scrub off as much airspeed as I could, but keep the nose a little bit heavy. And as I'm gliding in, switch everything off. So the ignition switch, the magnetos, the red switches, alpha and bravo off, the master switch off, the lights off, the strobes off, the fuel pump off, and the fuel selector valve, everything off in sequence following the dashboard. Remove my headset, throw it in the opposite footwell, unbuckle my 3-point harness over the shoulders and the waist, and then open the canopy door to my left, and very low level, so 50 feet, 40 feet, 30 feet, and then 20 feet thereabouts, and I was just quick as anything up onto the seat. I managed to clamber through that now open door aperture onto the left wing, and then I just went for it. I didn't even look down. I looked at the horizon because I knew, in terms of jumping safely, to look at the horizon, not look down. And I clapped my hands above my head in the sort of prayer position, snapped my feet and knees together, and I made the jump, a sort of a giant stride leap from the trailing edge to the back of the left wing. And I was doing about 30 knots running in, so 32, 33 miles an hour. And I jumped from a height of about 15 feet above the ground.
Now, just to put that into perspective, how tall are we talking? A building?
No, just very sort of low level sort of treetops. Maybe the height of a small lamppost in the street. Maybe 15 feet, thereabouts was the estimate. But running in the glide at that stage was probably 30 knots. So I left that wing. I landed in the long, soft... it was long, sharp Florida grass, but soft ground because of recent torrential rain. I knew that rainfall would give me some element of softer landing and sort of suppress the impact to a degree, but the sharp grass didn't necessarily help. So I rolled around in the sharp grass. I'm wearing shorts and t-shirt from that cockpit, and I remember my right shoulder was still on fire, so that was like a Roman candle. I packed that out. I had to pat my scalp out, which was still burning. And then I remember quickly getting myself into like the fetal position, like laid on my side. And I remember looking towards the distance where the aircraft was running in. and I just caught a glimpse of the aircraft in the distance, maybe 70 feet or so. She was nose heavy, left wing down, and I caught a glimpse, and the propeller was probably no more than about 2 meters, about 6 feet above the ground. And I physically watched my own aircraft essentially crash land into the ground, ugly noise, you know, crumpling, crashing, and the dirt and the dust flying up everywhere.
So you would have been dead had you not have jumped?
For sure. I mean, subsequently to that impact, that crash, there was a short pause, and we're talking 8-10 seconds max, and then there was an immediate explosion where clearly the fire had breached the actual fuel source, and it was an immediate like bomb blast going off.
So you're lying there, you're in the fetal position, obviously burnt. How did it feel knowing that you'd survived this? Or were you conscious at this point?
I was still conscious throughout all of it. So, for the record, I did not sustain a TBI or a traumatic brain injury. You know, I had a secondary impact, sort of face versus the ground, and I bilateral nasal fracture, supraorbital eye socket fracture, multiple soft tissue lacerations from the sharp grass. I had a hyperextended left index finger which fractured, popped my collarbone which fractured, inadvertently ruptured colon, large intestine, lacerated my liver, but I was 63% third and fourth degree burn. So I was a huge trauma. And you asked the question.
63%.
63% third and fourth degree burn. Fourth degree burn means we're talking exposed bone, because the burn in the lower shins, in the lower limbs, was so deep. So that's the fourth degree element that I sustained down there, because it was burning for the longer period in the cockpit.
So the flames had gone right through your skin and right through your muscle, all your tissue, right through to the
For sure. So we're talking the top 3 layers of skin down to sort of the deeper sort of substrate of skin, hence the sort of third degree. And then the fourth degree is when you have element of exposed bone that is protruding as a result of the burn with the exposure. And so I was a massive trauma. Let's make no bones about that. You know, I was a tremendous trauma as a younger man. I was 32 years of age when it happened. I was a young buck, and the luck of the draw for me was 2 things. One, I was as fit as a butcher's dog because of virtue of who I was and kind of what I did at the time. You know, partly for a living with my role with the army. But 2, and moreover, I got picked up, so I got airlifted quite quickly from the location. I got an ambulance on scene very quickly, but then subsequently a helicopter. Quick airlift, so they talk about that golden hour emergency medical repatriation response. And I got taken to arguably, probably the world's #1 burns and trauma facilities in Orlando. And those boys and those men and women, sort of 24/7 around the clock for the next 6 months, put me in drug-induced coma. They worked tirelessly on me around the clock.
So you were in a coma for 6 months?
6 months.
While they were working on you?
6 months. They did my hands on day 1. Pretty good hands for a burns guy. And to give you an indication, it was $2.7 million US on the medical insurance. And it's not a boast as such, but purely to give you a greater understanding of what it was that the medical authorities in the US had to do for me to pull me, like an extremely traumatized young man, back from the brink.
So 6 months after an induced coma, do you remember that day that you woke up, and how did you feel?
I do. Yeah, it was probably the second toughest day in my life. So the day of the incident, when it happened, the immediate pain in the aftermath and the pain being off the charts, indescribable, that was the worst day of my life. But the second worst day was 6 months later, and I literally woke up to the sort of ear bashing of one of the Essex nurses in, bless her, in Chelmsford burns unit, back in the UK now. So I was on the central burns unit for the UK.
So they transferred you from the Florida burns unit over to the UK whilst you were in a coma?
They did indeed. And this nurse specifically, it felt like a rude awakening because I'd been in America for 6 months. I don't have very much memory of that. Maybe one female American voice, and I think she was probably my lead clinician or my main nurse in America. So I had sort of vague sort of memories of that voice and that tone. But then this Essex nurse was like, all right, Jamie, got to get you moving now. Got to get you sat up in bed, my love. And got to get you sort of, up, slowly sort of up. And I'm like, what the And there was this tremendous fog going on, and I was really, really confused. And then she sort of opened the window a little bit, and this kind of rude sort of draft coming in almost. And I felt that was quite uncomfortable because the cold air. And it was actually February now, 2008, so 6 months on.
Wow.
And then very quickly, I remember this nurse, the fog clearing, and I kind of just about fathomed where I was and the fact that I'd survived and the fact that I'd made it and I was back in the UK. And
can you remember the thoughts that were going through your mind? I've made it.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't good. It wasn't good. I mean, I was in a desperate state, and I felt like I was really holding on, and the pain was really quite intense. And I was on a lot of analgesia and pain relief and painkillers and tablets and so on. But this nurse actually said, so I need you to have a look at yourself, Jamie, and we're going to have to, get you sat up and have a look at yourself. I'm going to get a mirror. It's important that you do this now and you do it early because there's been a bit of a change of appearance. And anyway, she wasn't wrong. She brought in this mirror, like handheld, by the bed, and I had to look at myself for the first time after 6 months. And my face back then was really quite swollen and really red and blotchy and angry looking. And it was pretty hideous to look at myself.
Had you lost a lot of the tissue on your face, or?
I think it was just mainly a lot of swelling because I'd had recent skin grafts. I mean, they even did the upper and lower eyelids. They grafted around my eyes. So tremendous amount of work in terms of plastic surgery and the skin graft. So human donor skin, pig skin, my own skin, massive amount of work from the surgeons in both America and in the UK. And I was like a guinea pig. It was trial and error.
So when you looked at yourself, when you saw yourself looking back at you, what did you think, or what did you feel?
I thought it was pretty grotesque at first, and just trying to get my head around it, and then the change of appearance. I mean, I'd gone from being, pretty reasonably good-looking bloke back in the day, before the injury.
But it was only 6 months before, right?
And
and you didn't know that 6 months.
Yeah, and that was obviously, manifested by like 45 seconds in that instant I described in the cockpit with the flames and the fire and getting blowtorched on the wing just before I jumped. Particularly down one side, and then obviously 6 months later waking up from post-surgeries in US surgery, UK surgery, so a lot of swelling, a lot of the body having to deal with it all, and it was really, really tough, and so it's not just the physical here, but it's the psychological. And for the record, it took me 3 years to heal, 3 years of surgery and interventions, but 5 years I would suggest mentally.
And how I want to talk about that healing. I mean, there's a physical healing, obviously, that you're going through, and I believe you're still going through that. Yeah. And we're years on, but the mental healing. So we just talked about, your appearance, which is, can be fundamental. How did you get through people seeing you as well? Because people can be cruel as well. Were you confident going out? And I know this would have been after the event.
I wasn't confident at first. It took a lot of time to generate that. And I mean, tentatively, just for me to go out when I got home from the hospital. Because in the hospital, it's not so bad. You're institutionalised. You kind of expected that you can kind of get away with it in the hospital because you've had an injury, and people, almost expect to see some guy that looks a bit wounded or injured. And so you don't feel too conscious. But when I came home and I was no longer in that institution and I'm on the street, sort of walking in the local cul-de-sac, rehabilitating at my mum's house at the time, back in Leighton Buzzard in Bedfordshire, I found it pretty tough. And I was tentatively going out and testing myself and pushing the boundaries on my walking, albeit slowly. And I remember one of the first events was I took a little trip up to the newsagent, and it was an Asian newsagent, and I wanted to buy a paper, but I felt really self-conscious before I even walked through the threshold of the newsagent's shop to buy this paper. And then I kind of needn't have worried because the guy actually looked quite friendly, and when I slid the money across the desk to buy the paper, he sort of said, "Oh, and how are you today?" And I kind of like sort of looked up from underneath my baseball cap and didn't expect that.
Yeah.
And then when I walked out and having got the paper, suddenly I felt a bit more sort of esteem, within me, self-esteem. I felt a little bit better, and that was the slow start of me kind of coming back. But it was really slow. Sitting in the doctor's surgery waiting, and like quite embarrassing, where it's deadly silent anyway in the doctor's surgery, isn't it? Everybody waiting to see the GP. And this little girl opposite in between her mother's legs sort of stood there. And she turned in front of everybody in silence, and she shouted out, "Mummy, what's happened to that man's face?"
As kids, but it's just kids will say probably what we're thinking, but we won't actually articulate.
Yeah. And I was like taken aback, like alarm, And then all of a sudden I thought, well, this is me. I've got to step up, because if I don't, I'm going to look like a prize, sort of all eyes on me sort of thing. So I actually put my best foot forward, as it were, sort of metaphorically. And I actually sort of leant forward and I sort of said to the girl and kind of got the mum's eye contact and said, "Look, it's okay." I said, "I was in an accident and I had a burn, but I'm okay now. I've just come to the doctor to get some medicine, but I'm feeling a lot better, And, I just kind of left it at that.
I imagine your recovery process, as you just said, was 3 years. If I can take you back to what the lowest moment was.
So it's a good question, Sonia, and believe it or not, 18 months on from the initial incident, I'm still in the hospital in Stoke Mandeville in Aylesbury. I was on that ward for a full 16 months, believe it or not, on the burns unit. But 18 months post-injury, and I felt like I was still in the fight of my life. And the way that I describe this when I'm sort of generally talking is that I felt like the boxer in the ring, but I wasn't on round sort of 12 and still fighting and still taking the knocks. I felt like I was on like round 4,120 something, and I'm still utterly exhausted, still in the ring, having had no respite, no rest whatsoever, and I'm still taking the punches.
But you're still getting back up.
And I didn't think I could do it any longer. And I was so tired of being in that fight and putting up that pretense every day. And I was going back for more surgery, not really getting the results, and I wasn't healing properly, and that was extremely tough.
So what was that low moment?
Well, because I wasn't seeing the progress, I guess, that I expected or wanted, the logical step for me at that stage of the game was to check out. And I actually considered assisted suicide as a logical option. And that's what I was actually looking into, like 18 months on. So
and that's not, we can't do that here, can we?
You can't do that here, but there obviously is ways and means, overseas. And I was genuinely looking into that option, and there was correspondence, shall we say. But luckily, I got to a point where I had sort of some external interventions with a gentleman that kind of was visiting me fairly regularly from the church.
Oh,
and that was quite interesting because he kind of came and talked to me, this gentleman. It was a black African guy from, I believe he was from like deepest...
Sounds like some sort of film, I think.
Yeah, believe it or not, he was from down Zimbabwe way. And but he was on some kind of secondment to Oxford, to a parish over there, doing some missionary work or whatever. And someone had got word to him and said, look, there's a gentleman that's struggling in Stoke Mandeville Burns unit, and he's really in a bad place, like in the fight of his life with this hideous burns injury. And it'd probably be good if you could visit. And I guess he took the carrot and thought, okay, yeah, I'd like to go visit the guy. And they said, would you be prepared to accept a visit from this pastor, a gentleman called Pastor Billy? And if you like, initially, reticently, I agreed to take the visit. And he came, and it was very nonchalant, the dialogue back and forward at first, because I was in a very low place and I didn't really want the visits. I wasn't interested. I'd sort of lost the plot. And he kept coming, and he sort of agreed to come week after week, and I kind of accepted that. Because there was something about him that I thought was pretty cool, that was a bit chilled. He didn't seem to have an agenda, and he wasn't trying to draw too much out of me. But he became a bit of an underlying friend to me, somebody to sort of lean on. And I started to talk more about me and how I was feeling and the deep depression that I was in. And I actually told him what I wanted. that I genuinely wanted to leave and sort of check out. And he said to me that he would help me. And when he first gave me that sort of...
So he would help you find the means to end your life?
Yeah, for sure. Well, he would sort of give me that hand to hold in order to help escort me and go. And I needed that kind of, that assistance, if you like, to get there. But in return, if you like, call it business and call it the kind of clever ultimatum, he told me to hold on for 1 calendar month. And I kind of reluctantly agreed to do that.
Why a calendar month?
I don't know, he just said, look, I'm prepared to help you, but I want you to do something for me. If you just hold on for 1 calendar month, then, I'll definitely help you. So we kind of shook hands, and that was it. And then...
what changed in the calendar month?
I don't know. I'm not entirely sure or convinced what truly happened. But all I know is that I went for a major surgery in the follow-up. It was like the following week with my burns consultant. That was my usual regular burns guy. So it was an Indian consultant at Stoke Mandeville. And I had a big op with a skin covering. And I think that came from, at the time, it was like a human cadaver. Perhaps somebody that was like a recent accident victim or a recent sort of surgery where they'd managed to harvest the skin or whatever. But I had this big... I remember the surgeon coming in, wagging his tail, saying, we've got this big skin order coming in and it's got your name on it. I propose to do the op in a few days' time. So I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever. And I agreed to do it. And we went down to theatre, we did the big op. And a couple of days on from there, probably 4 or 5 days, the nurses had to, as part of the procedure, take down the dressings, investigate the raw wounds, and change the dressings. And that was just the norm after surgery. And they found that the wounds had actually closed in quite a lot as a result of that recent surgery and that recent intervention. And that was the start. And it was almost like a miracle had started to manifest itself. And with that, slowly and tentatively, I started to get the new hope. And I started to see the light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. And I started to effectively claw my way towards that light and get out of there.
I mean, people talk about hope all the time, and I always think it's totally underestimated. I mean, did that glimmer of hope, would you say that, I mean, without wanting to put words in your mouth, was that a sort of a turning point, that glimmer of hope?
So it was the start of the turning point. Just to make it clear, it wasn't a sort of right-hand sharp bend in terms of turning the corner and getting better. It was more like the curvature of the earth. It was that slow for me. But it was the start of the hope that I needed and that little seed that I needed of something to hold on to and something to then therefore believe in and call it the new me, the version 2.0 that I was now sort of starting to crawl towards. And then so beyond that, so over the preceding weeks and months, my mindset started to shift. I no longer felt the urgency to want to check out and the rationale that I no longer wanted to be here. I started to turn a corner in my mind as well, and that was crucial. So it wasn't just the physical healing, but the turning the corner in the mindset. And with that, I was able to start to motivate myself more in a way that I hadn't had the previous motivation in those former 18 months because of the dreadful condition of my body. And with the new hope and the start of the healing, I started to test myself and I started to push the boundaries on walking. So at first I was learning to walk, to write, to feed myself within the hospital. I had renal failure, septicemia, and also all manner of complicated infections and even pneumonia. So that was the darkest period. But over the course of healing and time, I was able to start to push the boundaries slowly, learn to walk in the hospital, learn to sort of figuratively walk around the nurse's station once I sort of got out of bed, and then shift the boundary and the envelope. And then I was starting to walk around an aspect of the hospital and venture out to different wards within the hospital and talk to other people and sort of engage the sort of social element. And then once I got out of hospital eventually, after 2 long years, I'm starting to walk within the local area and I'm pushing the boundary on the walking. And eventually, by the end of year 3, I was actually going to 8 miles per day, which kind of harks back to a former military sort of ambition, sort of doing an 8 miler.
And if we now fast forward to today, Jamie, and I know you've been through a lot since then, and you've recently written a book, which we'll mention. What's life like for you now?
Well, it's good, but it took a long time to get there and many sort of frustrating years. I mean, I had surgery predominantly for the first 6.5 years. To date, I've had 63 operations under general anaesthetic.
Wow.
So they put me to sleep.
That must be some sort
times.
of a record, 63.
Probably not a record, but it's up there. I mean, it's not the norm, it's abnormal. But I've learnt to accept the new me, the version 2.0, and I've embraced everything in the sort of cognitive sense again. And I'm getting on with life. I'm wagging the tail once again about life, and I'm doing some pretty cool stuff.
You're doing some, I was going to say you're now helping others, right? And I know you work closely with Help with Heroes, and you're helping veterans as well that have also got overcoming their own disabilities.
Yeah, so I've been not just a beneficiary, but I've been sort of a lead ambassador with Help with Heroes for about 8-9 years. And that's enabled me to sort of help the charity a little bit as I've gone forwards.
I mean, I've got so many questions, and I know we're running out of time. But if you were to look back at this, at your accident, and I don't know if you're a believer in a fate, and I know I asked you offline about this, do you believe you survived for a reason?
It's difficult to actually put a real spin on that, but all I know that was I was blessed with the ability to be able to really, truly hold on and come through that trauma. And I don't believe many people could have done that in the great scheme of things. It was partly who I was at the time of the injury, but also, according to the expert medical response that I got in the US at the time, so which I'm forever grateful for. But obviously now that I have sort of made it and survived and pulled through, as it were, it's important that I kind of live a life still, and I kind of still take life by the horns and kind of be the best version of myself that I can be going forwards, and do a little bit to help others along the way as well. And that's kind of what I'm all about.
Jamie, can you tell me a little bit about your book, Life on a Thread? Because I know it's out on hardback at the moment.
Life on a Thread, What Doesn't Kill You, basically, published by Penguin. And that is out, it's just out on hardback with Amazon as we speak. It came out this summer. But the paperback with a new look, sort of revamped cover for Life on a Thread comes out with Amazon in May 2022. Well, above all, it's a real voyage. It's a real journey about somebody that went to the deepest or the lowest ebb of humanity in terms of trauma and bounced back from that. But it's pretty quirky in terms of backstory and everything that I went through in my sort of formative years. And then truly sort of coming through that journey, it's about how I was able to hold on, how I was able to spin it around and become that 2.0 version of my new self, and ultimately go on to make a relative success of the new life.
Jamie, you are an absolutely massive success, and I believe you're a massive inspiration to so many people out there. So I know I am truly honoured to have you as a guest here in my home and to be a guest on my show. So I just want to say thank you so much from all of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, there's a new interview out every Monday, so hit subscribe and like, and you'll get it straight into your inbox.